Young Money. Hey, yo, Spur.
Yeah.
Young Money. Young Money. Hey, yo, Spur.
Yeah. Ride with the mob, through Allah. Check you and me, and do your job. Earth is the name, Ben Baller did the chain. Phone up for the watch, Prezi plain Jane. Yamagini chain, rest in peace of my superior. Hermes with the feet of village in Liberia. TMZ taking pictures causing my hysteria. Mama see me on BET and start tearing up. I start killing niggas, how'd you get that trap? I got to the holics when you risk your life. Uncle used to skim perp, selling nicks at night. I was only 8 years old, watching Nick at night. Uncle Psycho was in that bathroom bucket. Hope that it don't cut him. Suicidal thoughts brought to me with no inventory. I was pitching selling things mad offery. Grandma had the arthritis in her hands bad. She was pumping pills like weapons, it's so shitty. I'll fuck a bitch for the irony. I said meet you at your house if your bitch keep eyeing me. Ride with the mob, Allah. Check you and me, into your job. Bird is the name, big baller did the chain. Phone up for the watch, Prezi plain Jane. Ride with the mob, Allah. Check you and me, into your job. Bird is the name, big baller did the chain. Phone up for the watch, Prezi plain Jane. Ride with the mob, sucker nigga, niggas up. Ride with the mob, sucker nigga, niggas up. Ride with the mob, sucker nigga, niggas up.
Hey yo, I'ma explain why you probably never see me. I push a Lamborghini, showed your magic like Houdini. My body shaped like Genie, booty dreamy, waist is teeny. Yes, I told him to get stable, so he streamy when he leave me. I go hard in the game, Biggie fire, give me the loot. I'm a classy millionaire, bitches ain't got the test. C-O-U-T-H, cause you can't spell it. If I call him, then he coming home, running Derek Kida. Bitches must be eating because I swear that bottom feet. How you know that you my son, I should've stuck you as a fetus. All these bitches rockin' just cause they follow in the leader. I just switch it up on Hoffman, rock that afro like Lupitas. I don't keep up with the justice, but I do know Capacita. I'm waking the TV, and by all of me, I'm Muga. The bitches, they got to check in with the queen. I'm the alpha, the omega, everything in between. Oh, ride with Menon, mashallah. Check in with me. Pin to your job, queen is the name. Rafaello to the chain. This is Monte, Patty plain Jane. Ride with Menage, mashallah. Check in with me. Pin to your job, queen is the name. Rafaello to the chain. This is Monte, Patty plain Jane. Eat a Barbie ass or something. Eat a Barbie ass or something. Eat a Barbie ass or something. Eat a Barbie ass or something.
Sucker nigga, niggas up. Sucker nigga, niggas all. Sucker nigga, niggas all. Queen for the kings and the queens.
Hey yo.
Okay, that's great.
Oh, okay, there we go. I think my mic audio is great. Well, I'll just say this right now, everyone. I'm going to... Both of our guests, we have a little bit of a timetable, but I should at least say this right now. Spooky is in dad duty, so I told him to join whenever he can. I'm not sure when that is, but he will be a little bit later. But let me just add in our 2 guests, if anything, because I know there's a bit of a timetable. So well, let me start with the or top to bottom then. Ivan, would you, or if you could, I guess, how would you describe? I guess what exactly? I mean, I already know you do the UBAR, but what other things have you done? How else would you introduce yourself, if anything?
Jeez, I don't know. I'm an overgrown monkey with a gorilla with a Dremel tool. Sometimes I make guns or something.
Well, I guess you like those 1911s in those pictures.
Oh, jeez, right? Yeah, those are the best. Those 1911s. Those are 1911s for sure.
Oh, let me go ask the next person, which I guess most people are the only one with the camera too, Mr. Hoffman Tactical. How would you introduce yourself?
It's Hoffman Tactical. I hope everybody knows who I am, right? So
right, yeah.
No introduction needed, I hope.
Exactly, right. But either way, you guys both are, AR-15 or lower developers. I guess Ivan, you do a couple other things, I guess, too. But I guess I have a couple of questions. Also, if anyone in the or comments or chat wants to ask anything, I'll be sure to ask it too. But let's at least start with I guess how you guys at least started your designs, if anything, or at least what were the original, I guess, inspirations and what were you trying to do with it? So we were talking a little bit beforehand. I guess Ivan, if you want to at least describe what was your first AR lower, and what kind? I guess the predecessor to the UBAR then.
Oh geez, so my first AR lower was the Foscad 5.1 GS. I've still got it. I ended up putting 1,300 rounds through it before I retired it because I figured it was kind of cool just to hang on to, and I don't want to have it break. But I printed it in ABS and then used acetone to glue it together and all that whole rigmarole. And I thought that was like the hottest shit ever. Like the fact that, oh man, you can do it, right? Because I built the ARs from stripped lowers, I guess, prior to that. But this was it. That was very cool. So from there, I messed around with some lowers. I had a little project where I wanted to try and get, because the big problem with the Foscad 5.1 GS is you have to use little bushings for the takedown pins. It's not set up to take standard takedown pins. So I made a version of that lower with the spacing on the pins was a little bit more correct because for whatever reason it wasn't perfect on the original file. So I made some corrections there and I released that, and I think that was like the Colt 15,000 or whatever I released that as. That was like one of my first releases, and I'm now like hideously ashamed of it because it's so bad. It's really not good. But from there I moved to messing around with the Vanguard lower in the Foscad repository because the Vanguard's probably a better design. And I liked the Vanguard. There was some forethought into it as far as, the creator knew it was going to be 3D printed, so there's some allowances in the design to account for that. But it also had like the distance between the takedown pinholes was wrong and the fire control group pinholes were in the wrong spot. So I went through and corrected those, and I sort of held onto that lower file as my own and messed around with it. And one day I was taking that lower out to shoot, and there's a little bit of a hill down to my shooting range, and the grass was very wet because it had just finished raining, and I slipped and fell as I was walking down this hill, very hurriedly because I think I just got new ammo in or something, and I was excited to try it. So I slipped down this hill, and the rifle was on a sling, and so the butt slams into the ground with all of my weight behind it because I tried to grab onto the rifle to steady myself. So all of my weight falls onto the buttstock of the rifle, which of course cracks it because this was a non-reinforced thin plastic ring holding the buffer tube on. And so it broke in 3 spots. And that, I pick it up, and I felt bad because I'd had like 800 rounds through this lower, and I was so excited to go and shoot it today. I was running down this hill in the wet grass, and I broke it. And so I was disappointed, and I go back inside, and I'm all sad, and I'm looking at the lower, and looking at how it broke, and you could very easily see from the way that the plastic was still sort of attached from where it broke, how that break actually happened. So I was sitting there looking at it and thinking, well, the way that you would stop this from happening is some mechanism would clamp down on the top of the buffer tube and hold it to the base of the lower itself, because the base of the lower wouldn't crack, and it seemed like it would be very hard to get it to break. And so I was sitting there looking at it and sort of like looking at little different nuts and bolts that maybe I could put on there, like standard hardware fasteners. And then all of a sudden it hit me, like the thing that I'm describing to myself in my head is a U-bolt. So I get on McMaster, find the U-bolt that looks like it'll fit. It's the closest to fitting over the AR-15 buffer tube without being so wide that it won't support the sides of it, which is a U-bolt that requires a little bit of grinding on the sides to fit over a tube, but that's not a big deal. And I got that U-bolt, designed a lower for it. The U-bolt got there, threw it on there, and then it was my little epiphany moment. That having that U-bolt on there like massively increased the strength of the lower. And then as I was doing this project in my mind, I was reminded of whenever I first posted my first 3D printed AR-15 lower onto the gun subreddit, there were people saying like, oh, you can't, because this was long enough ago that people were it's impossible to 3D print guns, don't even try. The AR-15 lower would be a grenade and it would take your face off or whatever if you even dared to shoot it. So I posted a video of me dumping a mag through it. And then people were in the comments saying like, well, it won't last another mag. And of course I'd already had like 600 rounds through the thing. So I knew better, but no one would believe me. So I was here claiming like, oh, I've got 600 rounds through it. And I'm just like drowning in downvotes because nobody believes you could put 600 rounds through a printed lower. So that was, that was, I guess, an indicator of how far things had come. But one of the guys that I got into my little Reddit argument with was, okay, well, if you got 600 rounds through it, you couldn't do a rifle push-up on it. That would break it clear in half. And I didn't want to hear it then because totally, there's no way that lower would survive a rifle push-up. Not a snowball's chance in hell. But I didn't want to hear that because like that seems to me like abuse of your rifle. When in the normal course of shooting your range gun are you going to like intentionally chuck it or intentionally do a rifle push-up on it? That shouldn't ever happen. So I didn't want to hear it then. But that always stuck with me as far as but maybe really deep down he's right. If you were if you're doing something serious with this gun, 2-gun or some sort of action shooting, you don't know, whenever you're under some sort of time pressure, you don't always take the time to sit down very gently and get into a nice prone position before you go and shoot. You throw your body at the ground and start shooting as quick as you can. So that sort of stuck with me. And so then once I had the first U-bolt lower put together, the first thing that I wanted to try was, can I do a rifle push-up on it? And then to my amazement, I could. And so I was like, okay, it didn't even make any cracking sounds. I'm going to do some more. And so then I pressed out a bunch, and then I recorded a video of one of these instances of doing a rifle push-up, and that video ended up spreading all sorts. I ended up seeing. I had a friend show me that video of me that he saw from Facebook of me doing a push-up on this lower, and he was like, "Is this you?" Because he recognized the carpet in my basement.
Wait, was this how this meme started?
It was interesting though that finally this guy gave me this inspiration to eventually have a lower that you could do a push-up on, and then I did a push-up on this lower, and then everybody sort of freaked out about it, like, oh look, printed lowers don't suck now, because I guess something that people always had in the back of their minds is those 80% polymer lowers for AR-15s are cheap and relatively easy to route out. You could do it just with a battery drill. I've seen it done with a battery drill and an end mill because nylon is so soft. But you cannot do rifle push-ups on those lowers; they will break. And so we saw the moment where everybody was like, "Oh wow, printed lowers don't suck. You can do abusive things to them." And so that's sort of the origin story there of the U-bolt.
I mean, Hoffman, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say it's very interesting that the rifle push-ups. I know I heard of the rifle push-ups from Ivan. It's interesting that they came originally from a Reddit troll.
Yeah, right. Essentially, yes, it was Reddit trolling that. It gave me a fairly decent test because, of course, it's completely non-standardized, and depending on the buffer tube you've got, or the stock you've got, or the pistol grip you've got, or if you do it on the magazine or the grip, there's so many different variables in the weight of the operator and how hard you're pressing out those push-ups. There's so many variables involved there. But the good thing about it, though, that seems fairly standard, is no matter what, you are putting a fairly significant amount of stress right there on the buffer tower, where if it isn't adequately reinforced, it will break.
So yeah, let me go ahead and at least pull up an image of at least the current UBAR. I think this is the V2, right?
I think technically, like, the deep lore here is the bottom one was a UBAR 1 and the top was a UBAR 2. But
well, yeah, if you can, or I'm not sure if my mouse is showing up for it, but yeah, this right here is, I guess, this is the UBAR part. This is what you were talking about, clamping down.
Yep, there's a U-bolt there that so the buffer tube threads into the lower, and then the U-bolt comes over the top of it and clamps the buffer tube onto the lower. So if you think about how a normal AR-15 lower works, that U-bolt is approximating that aluminum structure. And then the printed threads in that lower itself are strong enough to hold the thread on. From a standpoint of getting that tube to yank off the back of the gun, it really doesn't need much strength at all from the threads. And so all that you really need then is something to keep that buffer tube from being able to twist or rotate relative to the body of the lower, because that's where the cracking comes from. And the U-bolt itself does a very good job of that.
Well, I guess let me go ahead and ask this next question, because I'll ask this to Hoffman then, because you did a little bit of a different thing. I know Spooky, he's not here right now, but he also did use the U-bolt for his Firebolt as well. But you did a little something different, Hoffman. You did a hose clamp, correct?
Yes, we use a hose clamp or a buffer band, actually. So it's based, the U-bolt was the inspiration for that, I would say. I'm trying to think back to that time period, but yeah, basically the lower receivers that don't have a lower receiver that is printed horizontally that doesn't have any reinforcement in the buffer tower will break halfway up the buffer tower. So it splits at the basically along the center line of your buffer tower, or approximately in that area. And the idea behind the hose clamp was it's the same as the U-bolt. It's holding the buffer tube down against the lower. The difference is the U-bolt clamps the buffer tower to basically a flat bar on the bottom of the buffer tower, kind of the neck of the lower. The hose clamp clamps everything together, so it allows me to integrate the support rib. That's really the only difference. So I can put a support rib in there, which lets me make the whole lower skinnier, rather than having to have it a wider section by the rear takedown pin. That's really the only difference, but they're both doing basically the same thing, with that one difference that the U-bolt and the hose clamp different amounts of plastic. That's really about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, that's kind of, I just found it interesting too, because yeah, when I first saw this too, my immediate thought was, oh yeah, it's basically doing the same thing as a U-bolt, except it's a little bit thinner. That's kind of nice.
Yeah, same concept. And then I'm working. I don't have one with me, but I'm working on basically a metal strip with a couple of holes in it that'll replace the hose clamp. So I'm trying to make it more streamlined. So it'll kind of clamp in there. So really any clamping band works. So it's a little easier to make a buffer band streamlined than it is to make a U-bolt streamlined, I would say. But I mean, not really. That's kind of too generalized. But yeah,
no, I think you've got a point, because I saw a picture that you'd put on Twitter, I think, of your updated buffer band, and that's it's such a slim profile solution that it's practically mil spec and footprint, whereas the U-bolt.
So that is that was a carbon fiber nylon buffer band, which is an experiment, which is pressed over the buffer tower. So there's no active tensioning method. It's just a press on, and it's a pain to install. And I haven't done any. It's a really nice lower. I got a stock on it. So I don't want to break it, but I need to. So I need to do some destructive testing with it. But I just look at it. It's not as strong as a steel band, because you can't make it as tight. In theory, the carbon fiber nylon it's much thicker and doesn't have any cuts in it. So it should actually, because the cross section is so much higher than the steel band, it should have equal strengths to the steel band as far as like hoop stress goes. But because it's not as tight, it's not going to prevent the layers from cracking as well. So it is a lot stronger than a non-reinforced lower, but I still think a tight steel band is going to be necessary to get the full strength.
Right. That makes sense.
I do want to ask specifically, I do want to ask exactly what was your inspiration, but I guess we just kind of mentioned a little bit about P80. So let me go ahead and ask, because I know both of you guys have basically told me a similar thing. So I think most people should probably hear this. Someone said PLA is stronger than whatever they make the P80s out of, specifically under compression. I know I've seen you mention this on stream too before, Hoffman. I think you too, Ivan, but what is specifically wrong with a lot of the P80 like lowers or AR lowers, and why are they so terrible?
They're taking a part that was designed like in the 1960s for aluminum, and then they're just injection molding it from a nylon or reinforced nylon without any considerations for material or modern manufacturing techniques, which could make it better. Basically, they're just running through an already old, kind of obsolete design without adding any improvements to it. That's their big problem.
And the nylon's soft and not glass reinforced, so.
Are polymer 80s not glass reinforced?
I don't think the 80% lowers are, because
it's
been forever since I actually handled one of the lowers, but I'm pretty sure whenever you go in, at least in the pocket, when you go and mill out the pocket, I don't remember wearing a dust mask, and I don't remember like having respiratory issues, like when you normally cut on fiberglass, like you feel short of breath for the next couple hours. Yeah, I didn't have that, so I don't. As far as like the stupid idiot version test of it, I didn't suffer the ill effects of the stupid idiot test.
Okay, so I've never actually handled the P80 lower, so I'm not sure. I have one of the super cheap. Is it KP Tactical?
Like the KP15s.
No. It's let me. No, it's too far away. It's the absolute cheapest, like worst 80% polymer lower you can buy. I forget what it's called. You know what I'm talking about if I mentioned it. Anyway, it's the Kevlar reinforced nylon is what they claim.
Interesting.
So it was only like $35. They're really cheap. So that's the only polymer 80. I just bought it a couple months ago because I intend to do a push-up test with it just for fun, just to see.
Right.
But I don't know if the polymer 80s are reinforced or not. If they're not reinforced, that's like really bad, because just plain nylon is not particularly strong.
Right.
We'll probably get into that a little bit too. About, at least someone's also talking about filament strength. We'll definitely do that. But I at least want Hoffman for you to go ahead and explain specifically also what was you, or at least what came into your design or philosophy when you were first starting, or how did you basically come up with your original lower?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have a history page on my website where I kind of got a plugin that goes over that. But basically, I bought a 3D printer. I started making gun stuff right away. Not related to AR lowers. So I always had this idea that before I bought my 3D printer, the reason I bought it is because I knew a guy who worked for a company who actually 3D printed magazine followers, like for commercial Glock magazines. They're a big company. relatively in the competitive shooting market. So that's kind of what I was like, wow, this is like, I always never took 3D printers seriously. So I was like, wow, they're actually using these to make a real product. So I bought a Prusa and printed random stuff for a few months, firearm stuff. And then I decided that it was something that I had discussed with this gentleman, printing AR-15 lowers, and like if it was at all possible. So I decided to do one. I got on Google. The only thing I could find was a crude, I think it's still out there. It's a crude AR-15 lower on pinshape.com, which is a file sharing website. I downloaded it, looked at the file. It was way too crude to function. Very kind of a slap together design, no reinforcement, and not dimensionally accurate. So I decided to get rid of it, and I started from scratch. My original design, I think I used calipers, and then I found some blueprints online, accurate AR-15 lower blueprints. And then I kind of just designed basically a mil-spec lower receiver from scratch on SolidWorks. And then which I fortunately had access to, actually. I had I didn't have, I have my own license now, but I had access to it back then. So I designed a mil-spec lower. It lasted 2 rounds. Firing from the hip, and it just broke right away. It was incredibly thin with the buffer band. So, and I had really no idea what kind of stress it would take. So then I kind of went from there, and my third version, I was just looking at the lower, how could I improve this? And that's when I thought of the support rib. I was just looking, I think I even have it on video. I was thinking about it on video, because the buffer tower has limited cross-section at the neck. So I was trying to figure out how I could add more cross-section, I could add a brace to it. And that's where I came up with the reinforcement brace, which is really the key to all my lowers, even more so than the hose clamp, really. And then I just kind of took it from there. And then it was a progression for a few months until I got a pretty strong non-reinforced lower. And then I saw the U-bolt lower, and I'm pretty sure it was a U-bolt that was the inspiration for it. I decided to add a hose clamp around the buffer tower to prevent the cracking at the halfway point. It was really what it was, is I did a rifle push-up test, broke one of my lowers, and that's when I really saw exactly how it was breaking. And from there, I went with the hose clamp, and then the rest is kind of history. I ran with the hose clamp for a little while, and then I decided to do the super lower, which was using kind of my new design philosophy, trying to make it more streamlined. And that's kind of it.
Well, yeah, I remember I saw the dual ribbed one too. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, so that was I was kind of cranking through those designs because people were asking for them. That was my old design. So that was based off of my original AR-15 lower design. I used certain design techniques to draw the lower, because in CAD, you can draw anything really any way you want. And I had used a certain series of operations to design that lower. And all of my lowers up until the first super lower were based off of that original technique. It was kind of a blocky technique. So I was going through a progression of lower receivers, and I actually did that double rib. I actually never printed that rib myself. I had a gentleman who was kind of testing them for me, and he printed it, but I didn't. I only had a couple printers back then. I was printing other stuff. So I actually never printed that double rib, original double rib design. I'm sure it was strong, but it was kind of wide and more chunky than I'd like.
Yeah, I thought it looked funny because, this wouldn't be a shock. One of the first people I even had on this channel was actually, I guess, the person that's coming in too. But, there's one brick lower I'm loyal to. It's definitely Spooky. So let me make sure I can add him in also. He's done being a dad right now.
Spooky.
So. Oh, dude.
So,
did AG Cast warn you? We're here to kind of
crap.
Well, no, I didn't warn him yet, so this will be fun too. But Spooky, there is a stream actually. It's the second one I have up where I think we talk specifically what was your design, or if you want to give a quick rundown exactly of what led to the Firebolt specifically, because I think Hoffman has a lot of. I think Hoffman will have a couple of things to tell you specifically when he's going to respond.
Wasn't that like a 4-hour stream too?
It was. That was a long one. Yeah,
for a while.
But yeah. Either way, give a condensed version specifically of what led or what inspired the Firebolt specifically and what led to that. Let me see if I can get a picture for while you say that.
Sure. I will tell you I'm winded because I just moved an entire massage chair up a flight of stairs. So I might be a little slow and I might be catching my breath. So
don't worry, you're good.
So I got into the printing community in 2020, late 2019, and I didn't start getting into AR-15 lowers until until I started watching the Vanguard development happen and seeing how strong it was. Because I was always worried about the durability of AR lowers. I was always kind of like questionable. Like everyone was. It's just like, how the hell is this shit 3D printable? And I started with the bolt-up lower, and I printed that one. I actually printed it pretty conservatively, and it worked. And then one day we were kind of like fucking around in the chat late at night back on Keybase, back on the Keybase days. And someone was like, it was just like some random spur of the moment thought of just like, what if we added the U-bolt to the bolt up design? Because back then I was just like widening the mag wells a little bit to make it so that the front takedowns didn't break as easily. I think I also widened the buffer tower arms a little bit so that they didn't crack as easily. But then it was always about the buffer tower itself not cracking. And so it was like, well, why don't we just add the U-bolt to it? Just add the U-bolt geometry. So that's what I did one night. I booted up the Vanguard. So booted up the Vanguard and I started bringing the geometry over. And I managed to actually get it to work, printed it, bought a U-bolt from McMaster, which was a mistake. I could have got it on Amazon for $1 and I ended up spending $12.
No, don't support Amazon now.
I'm not, but I definitely McMaster doesn't even give you a fucking price when you check out. They're like, oh yeah, we'll bill you. Don't worry about it. And then you get the email bill later. It's like $12. But yeah, it fucking worked, and it was just like the first step into the Firebolt. I think we mixed the name of the Wildfire, which was also being developed at the time, and then Bolt Up, so Firebolt. And that was the philosophy from that point out, was just like a durable, super long, longevity-driven lower that it was easy to print, relatively easy to put together, Lego set, and you could fix it relatively simply if something broke. Like usually the pistol grip part broke a lot. You could just reprint it and then just slap it in there, and instead of having a day and a half print, you have a 2-hour print.
So this will be a fun thing too, because this was something we were talking a little bit earlier, but you are Hoffman. What is your position, I guess, on bolt designs, if anything?
Yeah. So we were talking about that earlier, and I was just going to say that at this point, bolt together lowers are kind of obsolete. But we were discussing there were some advantages, and I think the advantage that came up was your pistol grip attachment point. You have an integrated pistol grip, which is fixing a huge problem with the rest of the lowers out there, which is really the biggest weakness on my lowers, and probably on the UBAR as well, is the pistol grip attachment area. So it sounds like you have a distinct advantage there from me looking at the designs.
I will say, this one right here, this person didn't actually do it. I know the one I have somewhere on this computer.
That's an OEM grip.
Although I will say this though, RK, I forgot which, or if you buy from RK Spookware, he has a specific like self-tapping screw that works. It goes long enough and it works well enough where I haven't had too many issues with it. But yeah, if you use a typical screw length, it's just you are begging for it to fall off. In fact, that actually happened to me. That was, I think I uploaded that part too. That was
it's the constant rocking back and forth that just loosens up that grip, and that really tiny thin attachment point eventually just gives.
I know, Ivan, we were talking a little bit earlier too. Do you want to mention, what you were telling me about how at least grip screws, or a lot of the grip screws, and why they're just very inconsistent?
That's an interesting thing. So in addition to just sort of the usual, like as you're holding the gun by the pistol grip, of course, as the gun recoils, you're fighting that with your pistol grip hand. I found one thing that also greatly contributes to breaking them is if you one-hand your gun. So just holding it by the pistol grip, you've got the whole weight of the front end of your gun, essentially balance beaming off of your hand as the fulcrum. So that does put a ton of stress at the pistol grip mount into the lower. So I've noticed that to be a big cause of issue there, as well as if you do rifle push-ups on your pistol grip. That'll certainly beat the heck out of them.
Yeah, so doing one-handed shooting, I'll definitely second that. That probably puts the most stress on your pistol grip of anything you can do. It's just because your entire recoil force is on the pistol grip. Really, when you're shouldering the weapon and firing, the pistol grip really has almost no stress on it because it's all transferred through the stock to your shoulder. But one-handed puts significant stress on the pistol grip, and that's where I've seen them break, is when I'm one-handing. So
right. And one of the big things that I've noticed with breakages at pistol grips, I've been fortunate enough that I've really only had a couple, and I've had more with the 3011, which is AR-15 pistol grip based, than AR-15 lowers, for whatever reason. But
I've had that happen to me too. Yes, I think it's actually a lot one-handed.
Yeah, yes, I think it's shooting one-handed and the slide slamming forwards. It's quite a bit of reciprocating mass. But one thing that I've noticed is I had 13011 that consistently wouldn't have like I beat the heck out of this thing. It was not treated nice, and it never had that break. And then I had one break where like I put 20 rounds through it and then just sat it down and never touched it again. And it ended up cracking while like the crack wasn't there after I shot it and put it down. But then when I came back to it like 3 months later, the crack was there. So what I discovered then is it's incredibly easy to over tighten the grip screws whenever you're tightening straight into PLA. And because PLA exhibits what's known in the loser material science world as creep, it experiences static creep. So while you're not actively tightening the screw, the plastic itself, because it's under stress, it'll try and stretch out essentially.
So
but because it doesn't want to stretch, it will crack at layer lines.
Yeah, so so PLA doesn't really actually have a creep issue in the traditional sense of the word, but it suffers from layer delamination under load. So it's not quite the same. It's like nylon suffers from creep. So it's a little bit different. But I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, if you over torque your grip screw, the layer lines will kind of pop apart over time.
And so, the thing that I noticed that was then different between these two is, I tightened the grip screws down on both of these guns about the same, but the one that was stored and didn't really get shot broke. And then the one that I shot that was that kind of beat on didn't break. And then it was whenever I took both of the grip screws off because I was planning on changing the grip on the one that was holding together, I noticed the grip screws were like completely different lengths. And so then I went and was digging through my great big bin of AR-15 grip screws and stuff. And then I noticed some of them are like 7/8 inch long on the threaded part. Some were 1 inch, some were 1 1/16, some were 1 1/8. So it was like all over the place. And so then I was like, okay, I'm going back to the technical data package. There must be an answer here. The technical data package says that 1 1/16 or 1 1/8 is correct, and anything shorter isn't specified, at least for the M16s.
Yeah, it's 1 inch as far as I know, but yeah, it's at least an inch.
So the interesting thing is then in the M4 technical data package, it is 1 inch. So at some point the military changed it, and probably because like an 1.28 thread, 1 1/16 long bolt is 100% not a standard size because fine thread 1/4 inch is not standard in the first place. And then in a weird 16th inch length, it's like 100% a non-standard part. So Armalite was probably cutting those bolts down to length and then just sort of settled on it. And since it'll fit, they were like, this is the one that goes in the guns. But by the time the military adopted it, it went into rotation. I'm sure they realized in an aluminum lower, a 7/8 inch long screw is plenty. You don't need anything longer than that because the grip will break or the screw will break before that aluminum lower breaks with that much thread into the lower. But in a plastic lower, that's not quite the case. With a 7/8 inch long screw, that screw is like maybe halfway up to the thin part of that fin that this grips mount into. And so this lower that broke after me not shooting it much had one of these 7/8 inch long screws in it. So that screw didn't actually have a very good hold into the lower in the first place. Meanwhile, whenever you have 1 inch or 1 inch or a 16th screw, they'll hold into the lower so well that like that screw is actually up outside of that thin fin section and into the bottom of the fire control pocket. And that's the one that held up really well. So the thing that I noticed there is there's a wide variety of grip screws that you can get whenever you're buying grips or buying grip screws individually. And because the mill spec for these things is like, I don't know, something between 7/8 of an inch and 1 inch and 1 1/8, why should it matter? Because as far as aluminum lowers are concerned, it doesn't really matter. So the specs for these things are sort of fast and loose. And so when you put them on a printed lower, it does actually kind of matter. So if you're having issues with grip screws consistently breaking, one thing that I could recommend is you get on McMaster and order a bunch of 1 inch or 1 1/16 1/4 screws. If you get 1 1/16, the screws end up costing like $1.50 a piece, which is ridiculous for a screw. But it's a super non-standard size, which is probably why people who are selling these grips aren't making their own screws. They're also buying screws from places like McMaster, and they're buying them by the bucket full, and they're buying them in standard sizes like 7/8, 7/8 inch long. And so that was sort of another thing that I discovered is, I guess in the aluminum lower world, you'd never notice it and it wouldn't matter. But in the printed world, like it suddenly matters quite a bit because it's the difference between a lower that breaks from just you didn't even shoot it. It just sort of sat there because the grip screw was over tight versus one that had the grip screw over tight and had hundreds of rounds put through it and was always fine.
I have a couple of things I want to let you go for that because I've seen a couple of questions about this specifically, and one of them is someone's asking, "What about HTPLA or annealing your PLA? Will that prevent that layer or delamination under load?" I think they're talking about the grip area. Well, maybe I know for a fact for when I did my when I did my Firebolt video specifically, I was in a very hot temperature. Or it was at least like 115 degrees. Where if you want to do the conversion rate, maybe it's like 40 degrees Celsius, which is pretty. Yeah, it's hot. So
On the surface of the sun.
no, it was a quarry and it was very hot. But that PLA, it's not, or it's a very stiff. It's really nice, but when it gets hot enough, things under like spring tension stuff like it's a lot easier to kind of pull things apart.
Yes.
I think if they're assuming just anneal, like in that very specific case, I would probably assume if I annealed HDPLA it would have helped. But I don't really think annealing just PLA altogether would prevent the layered delamination.
Yeah. So of course it's easy to mix up remelting and annealing, which are two
Right.
totally separate things. And a lot of people are confused about that, but remelting is a whole nother class in itself. So annealing, I haven't done enough testing with PLA annealed to really know for sure. The limited testing I've done, layer adhesion doesn't really improve because all that's changing is you're going from a semi-amorphous to a crystalline compound, and that doesn't really affect the interlayer adhesion. It's more of it affects glass transition temperature and then impact resistance and tensile strength.
And that for me, like in that specific situation where I know for like I remember like a lot of the things I had under spring tension were kind of like a little, they kind of deformed a bit. It wasn't like the lower didn't break really or anything, but there were some things that kind of moved a little bit out of place. I attribute that more to it was really hot outside, and of course nothing broke, but I'm assuming annealing PLA would have probably helped that in that specific case, but I wouldn't say that really would have fixed it. But this is another question though, specifically for you, Hoffman. Though you have, or what is it? Plastic Gats is asking.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. How bad is that problem after adding the nut from your super lower parts?
So I've never had a 100% infill lower crack at the pistol grip area. Printed from a good quality PLA plus. I did have a low infill. I did a test with one of my LR308 lowers. It was a really low infill, like I was 15% infill. That one broke when I was shooting it one-handed, or it was two-handed, but it was mostly on the pistol grip. So once I used that brass insert, the brass insert is marginal benefit. It's more of it makes it easier to assemble. You don't have to worry about tapping into PLA or whatever, or nylon, which is even worse. So I've never had a failure, but I don't think it really gives much improvement over just if you use the proper length screw and you just tap it and put the screw in, or use a self-tapping screw. I don't think a brass insert is going to make it any stronger. I think it's going to be very similar. It's more of an ease of use thing than anything else.
Yeah, that's at least for me. That's what I noticed. But I feel like this is probably a good question too, because I know I'm not sure exactly or everyone's opinion on this one specifically, but I know Spooky, you do a little bit more walls, I think less infill, right, for your lowers. I think Hoffman, you said specifically you go, or if you want the strongest one, you say 100% altogether.
So it's very dependent on what parts you're printing. So Spooky's lowers are both together, and I actually haven't really analyzed the parts at all, but it's very likely that more walls is advantageous. So a lot of people like to generalize that walls are stronger than infill. That's completely inaccurate. That has to do with if you have a part that is printed, let's say flat on the bed, like this, and then you try to bend it this way, in that case, it's a beam, so your stresses are concentrated along the top and bottom.
It's a mix of shell and orientation.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have a part that you want strong in just plain tensile strength, then going with 100% walls or 100% aligned rectilinear infill, they're going to be equal, with the difference that less walls tends to curl. The more walls you have, the more curling issues you tend to get, at least in my experience. So that's why with lower receivers, because of the way the stresses are set up, I prefer to go with 3 walls and 100% aligned infill. So the aligned infill is key, obviously, because all your infill lines are running in the right direction. But your print settings are completely dependent on the part you're printing. So you can't generalize and say that more walls is better or that less walls is better. So it depends what you're doing. For my lowers, and I would say also Ivan's UBAR lower, 3 walls and 100% aligned infill is going to give you the strongest lower.
I guess I'll let Spooky at least mention that, and then I'll let Ivan go ahead.
what's nice about the Firebolt is you can print all of the components in their what's the word I'm looking for? The most efficient and best orientation for handling stress. So like the sides of the FGC, the fire control group, you can print those on their sides, and they're the best orientation to handle those stresses. You can print the buffer tube in the correct area. You can print the magwell in the correct area, and the magwell front piece that handles the takedown. You can print that on its side, which is all ideal for handling all of those stresses. And that's why I tend to go for about 6 to 8 walls. And I usually say about 50% infill for handling those stresses because, one, I like it when you can be a little bit conservative with your filament. You can kind of save a little bit on that. And two, I've also made it kind of a philosophy to make it so that my lowers can be printed with stuff like PLA, like my Thunderbolt is printed in PLA. And two, you can print it pretty conservatively and still be relatively sure that it'll handle the stresses just fine.
I guess Ivan too. You know, how do you recommend yours then printed specifically? Do you like more walls or infill type of a thing?
So the walls versus infill thing is an interesting debate. Generally speaking, I think the reason that all walls or a lot of walls is generally recommended is because getting infill tuned properly so that you have a completely solid print that doesn't have any gaps in it is difficult. And it's much easier to tune your printer and tune your slicer settings to make it so you don't have gaps between walls, because gaps between walls are easy to solve. Gaps in between infill is like one of like 12 different settings in your slicer that you can end up having a little rabbit chase on.
So yeah, so of course my response to that is because you're not using Prusa slicer.
Right, that's certainly true. That's the reason a lot of people run into that trouble. Yeah. So I usually just default to saying 8 walls on most stuff, because that way, if you're somebody who's stuck on Cura or whatever other slicer, S3D or what have you're using, if you're running with 8 walls, you'll have a print that should be strong enough, even if your infill comes out a little bit questionable. But for some of my personal prints and a lot of my early prints, it was usually just 2 walls and 100% fill. Because assuming you have everything tuned nicely and you have a solid print, one solid print, like 100% solid part that's been printed well at hot enough temperatures and it wasn't cooled too fast, will perform very similar to if it's 8 walls 100% infill or 3 walls 100% infill. It'll all be relatively close in terms of strength, and it'll all fall within margin of error for one infill setting to the next. You'd have to have massive sample sizes to establish what exactly works the best. So generally, my advice is get whatever gets you to get whatever you print with, whatever gets you closest to a 100% solid print as you can. And my guidance is 8 walls and then 100% infill, and hopefully that gets you there. But the underlying lesson that's too long to fit in a README there is just make sure it's a solid print.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I give a hot take?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So print with Cura. Never update Cura. That's my hot take.
Yeah, Cura's always interesting. I can understand why some I kind of do wonder if I just spent the extra money on a Prusa and just experience Prusa slicer, would it actually be so amazing?
Prusa slicer is not for. I mean, it obviously works great with Prusas, but Prusa slicer is what I use on my little ender. So I mean, it runs with
all of my enders. I've built profiles for the Prusas on, and I guess the difficult thing is Cura's got a profile for an ender that's practically plug and play. It's it's authorized by the gods of ender themselves. That that in Cura it's meant to work right off the bat, whereas the default Prusa profiles for enders are like not fantastic.
Yeah, that's true.
But with a little bit of massaging, you can get you can get your enders printing nicer with Prusa slicer, I think, than in Cura. It's just maybe a little bit more work. So if you figured out how to print and you're not constantly battling your printer and leveling your bed doesn't scare you anymore, I would recommend, my hot take, I would recommend try out Prusa Slicer and get yourself a printer profile set up there, because Prusa Slicer is, in my opinion, a much nicer environment.
Yeah, so just to be objective about it, Cura does have a lot of interesting settings and things you can tweak that Prusa Slicer doesn't have. So there's things you can't adjust in Prusa Slicer. Like, for an example, Cura, you can adjust the flow rates for infill and walls separately, which is kind of nice, and you can't do that in Prusa Slicer. But Prusa Slicer has a much nicer interface. It's faster, and it's just less buggy in my experience. Cura has some weird little things.
Sometimes you'll be slicing apart.
There's that don't update part right there.
Yeah, exactly. So That's what I try to advise beginners to kind of go try Prusa Slicer rather than just Cura, because I think they'd find it they'd have less trouble.
I will mention this too, though. I'm not sure if you guys saw the most recent Cura update, but there was, I think, was a 3D Print General was kind of telling me about this too. But they have a specific thing where they are making it so you can make variable wall
width.
Wall width, which that's another thing too, which I've been looking up a little more into. Is wall thickness in of itself is also a very nice thing to have is with when you're printing something that's strong.
And then tree supports is another thing Cura has. So Cura just has more. It's had more development kind of going into the features, which is why I have Cura. So it does have some nice features.
Yeah, but at least going back, at least more to the AR stuff specifically, I kind of want to get a little bit more into the design philosophy of it. I want to say something too, because I know both with the UBAR and also with your printed lower or Hoffman, you guys use some reinforcement for at least the front takedown pins, at least. Right.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask Ivan about that actually. The UBAR, the latest U-bolt lower, uses the little eye bolts. Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was a really good idea. What's the history behind that?
So I wish I could claim that as my own idea because it is like fantastically smart. Yeah. I had messed around with something similar and was like maybe on my way to that destination, but then a guy on Reddit whose Reddit name I think is Dreadnought1. He's in the UBAR documentation. He's credited there. He just messages me out of the blue saying, "I really like the U-bolt Vanguard lower. Here's the modification that I made." And I had been trying to use like those super cheap, like essentially the little like round hooks, like the hooks you hang up a hammock with.
Oh yeah.
And like the inside diameter on them is not consistent one to the next. And so I had a miserable experience with them. Plus, they're all like super soft steel, so it wasn't really much stronger than the plastic that was holding in the front pin. So I sort of ditched the idea. And this guy just out of the blue on Reddit messages me and says, "Hey, look what I came up with." And he was using some of these like forged steel rod end eye bolts that have precision ground 250 quarter an inch inside diameter holes in them. And he found some. Like an initial item listing for these things, and immediately I saw it like, oh, this is it, this is perfect. And initially he was threading them down into the front of the lower and made the magwell like the boxy squared off like the original U-bolt Vanguard has. But I was already wanting to do a sort of angled magwell cut so you can fit drum mags, and so it doesn't take as much material when you're printing, and then the risk of warping is much less significant whenever the front of the magwell isn't on the print bed.
Fits waffle mags too, by the way.
Right, and it'll fit waffle mags now too. And so me and that guy on Reddit went back and forth until we eventually found those specific eye bolts, which are a common part McMaster has, and I think MSD Direct also keeps them in stock sometimes. But MSD Direct wants a lot of money for them. The unfortunate thing is
Spookware, but yeah, go ahead.
Spookware as well. So yeah, the unfortunate thing about them is they're expensive. It's like it's a $5 to $7 bolt whenever you find them in stock, because it's a forged bolt. It's something that's like proof loaded. They proof load these at the factory to. It's some ridiculous amount of weight.
Really nicely made parts, yeah.
Right. It's intended, the intended use of these things are for you to like anchor them inside of steel contraptions, and they're used in factories for hoisting stuff and these sorts of things. So they're made for much more load and abuse than we'll ever put on them in our applications. But they're fairly well made, if being a $7 forged steel component is a lot to stomach. But it was sort of like this guy reached out to me out of nowhere on Reddit. So I guess this is Reddit's redemption arc after being like really shitty to me and downvoting me because I said that printed lowers actually do work. That somebody on Reddit reaches out and says like, here's my idea. And then it struck me like, well, that's perfect. I didn't even know these existed. So integrated them into the lower, did a couple of test versions, and that's how the U-bolt Vanguard became the UBAR. Because it still uses the UBAR reinforcement at the front, but like the big weak part on the Vanguard then was like specifically it was if you take the rifle over your head and do like an axe chop with it and chop the stock into the ground, which is like it hurts to do because it's like abusive to your gun. But if you did that enough, you could get the front takedown pin area to crack fairly easily.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's true. The front takedown pins don't really have that much load on them during normal use.
Yeah.
And the majority of the failures I've seen are always during takedown if someone takes the lower and over rotates it. That's 90% of your failures. So yeah, that's true.
It's really just abuse cases that it covers. But then once you have that accounted for, you're left with a lower that as far as the places that you're most commonly will break, it's starting to approach the durability of an aluminum lower in that regard, where you'd have to be some like gorilla strength or using tools to get your thing to break.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I kind of want to just mention this a little quickly. I think someone's mentioning whether they could a laptop or PC for 3D printing. Really, either would probably work. I will say the most recent Chairman One frames, if you want to slice them, you need a lot of RAM because, dear God, those things have a lot of geometry to them. But like for most of everything else, yeah, whatever. I've used a really old, like crappy Linux like laptop that is very, very out of date from like 2012, and you can slice any of these lowers probably just as fine with this.
Oh yeah.
But I wanted to at least mention this to you for Hoffman, because I know I was going to talk about what you did specifically for your front takedown pins, because you did something too. Let me also pull it up.
Yeah. So what I did is I just directly copied the Hellfire lower. That's all I did. A bunch of people started emailing me saying, "Hey, like your lowers, but the front end is weak. Why don't you just do this?" So that's why I did that. So those front takedown pin plates are directly from the Hellfire, or originally the Wildfire. So that's all there is really behind them. And I just used some common 1032 hardware just to bolt them on the front, and they work really well. I've seen a couple of failures, and the failures are not the actual pin, not the takedown pin breaking out, but it's your little detent pin, which your little detent pin in spring, which is what retains your mil spec takedown pin, that cracks the side of the takedown plate. So that's the only real failure I've seen on them. But yeah, that's directly from the Hellfire lower.
And I at least want to mention this too, because this is also another thing I kind of like what Spooky was mentioning about his Firebolt too. In particular, is the nice thing about the print orientations is you don't really need any of that too, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's true. And actually, so to give Spooky a little credit, I've been looking at doing a mutant lower. So I think Spooky, you're working on like a mutant AK-47 mag lower, right?
I am very close. I got sidetracked by Waffle 2.0.
Okay, yeah.
I literally just have to model the fucking mag release.
My intention is to actually break the mag well up into a right-hand and left-handed piece, and then bolt them onto like a dovetail on the rest of the lower body. So that is because
there's not a lot of material on that thing. It's going to be tough.
It is. There's not much room there. And I haven't really worked on it very much yet, but that's my intention, because there isn't really a place to put front takedown pin plates on a AK-47 mag lower.
AG, I'll send you my.
What do you say?
You'll send me. You can also screen share too. If you guys also want to screen share anything, just let me know. You guys can do that too. I only got a couple of these
68 tabs of hentai.
It's not really that. It's a lot of other med stuff, but I'll go with that. It's more fun.
Don't worry.
It's homework, Mom. Okay, but yeah, I at least want to mention, because that's one of the things I at least it's a thing that I really didn't realize is that big of an issue for most people, because the main printed lower I've been using was the Firebolt, and that the front takedown pin area was never really a problem for me in particular, just because I just never really had any issues. I had like no cracks or anything. The only thing that happened to me was just the grip area in particular. But I guess I know someone was mentioning me to that too, is that they said they like the UBAR a lot, except they just don't like the idea of having to buy an IBAR or the iBolts, just because they're not really common to find.
Yeah, you have to go with the MasterCard iBolt, because I actually bought one at the local hardware store just to see if I could use it, and your locally available U-bolts are not made to any particular specification. It's just a bent piece of threaded kind of crude steel. So it's not, you really have to go to McMaster to get the proper specification.
And that kind of gets to the interesting part too of, I guess, what is there was the Wildfire in particular, which is, it is a, I guess, fully printed AR lower. The screws are printed, everything is kind of printed, right? That's the Wildfire, right?
Yeah, the Wildfire came first. It really
Hellfire.
The Hellfire was the practical version. The Wildfire was not really. It was kind of a Lego-ish, not really practical.
Right, yeah, because I remember for a while it was the Hellfire was, I think, the most common printed lower for a bit.
It was.
Yeah, that one was super popular back in the day.
Because it was the one that you just everything was printed.
Back in the day, that's funny.
Yeah, well, I mean, it feels weird too now because really no one talks about it anymore now.
Yeah,
It-
yeah, I found that weird. I was thinking about it the other day. It is weird how it's just totally gone.
It's completely everyone's just kind of forgot about it. Like except the most people I do know. Like if someone has a Hellfire, I was like, okay, you've been into this a very long time. Then you've been around for at least since like 2020 or at least 2021ish. But yeah, it's interesting too because the design or at least like Spooky, you kind of went with fully modular. If it breaks, you can do that or you can replace anything. The parts, I mean, depending on how long I guess M3 screws are, it's in the US it probably would be nicer if you could use imperial screws, but
Yes, metric guys is for commies. So.
I couldn't
Don't care.
agree more
Don't
with you,
care.
Hoffman. I'm
I
so
can
glad
divide
you
by 10.
such a brave thing to say
Yeah,
into this conversation.
I was working on the and I actually had some questions about the Ivan's MP5, and I had to go and order like these weird specialty metric bolts. Quite a pain, I have to say. So I definitely am not a fan of metric hardware.
You and me both, friend. You and me both. I think Ivan and Spooky both will let you. Or, Ivan, I know both of you two actually like metric, and so seemingly everyone else does too. But I'll let you both elaborate why you prefer it.
I
know
like
what?
metric.
I don't have to. Go ahead.
I like metric because you don't have to do math because like you sit there and go like 7/16 is 14:30 seconds.
Myth.
And you subtract
That's a
one, it's
myth.
13:30 seconds. It's too much work, especially when it comes to drill bits. Like metric drills are nice because they're all like 0.5 millimeter steps, unless you're like getting really weird. But that's like beyond the realm of anything you'd ever actually deal with normally.
Well, I use decimals for everything, so I don't have to worry about that. Super easy.
But you
conversion.
can't order screws. You can't order screws in decimal inch. Like you go to order screws and it's like I need a doohickey. Like it's like 4 doohickeys and like 1/5 of a pound of bird feathers. It's all just like such a stupid system. And
No, it's not really. You have the metric is the M5 and the English is number number 8 or whatever. So
oh my god! And the number screws are the absolute worst. It's like the bane of everyone's existence because then you have to go and pull up your screw chart and it's like a number 6 is a 164. There's no 164 drill bit you can commonly buy. It's just like it's a clown shoes.
Number
world.
6 is just too small to use for anything. It's number 8,
Yep.
number 10. That's your world. So it's actually just 2 screws. So it's really straightforward actually. So I don't know what everybody's problem is. Like it's not like a thing you have to worry about. There's like much bigger problems in the world than worrying about your screw sizes.
I prefer not to measure my screws in football fields per hospital bill. So I just dividing by 10 seems pretty easily in my line of work here.
When the Chinese invade, both Spooky and Ivan will feel great. They'll feel no pain.
I always give Jay Stark deference because the FGC 9, okay, makes sense. Everything's in metric. Okay,
Yes,
I'll give it
yes.
that. With AR lowers and stuff like that, it's an AR lower. You usually get an AR upper, although I guess now we're getting closer to being able to fully DIY it. You're going to at least need an AR upper, which is going to be using imperial units. So it just seems easier that way. But that's
And they're
I'm
English. They're English units. We don't have to keep calling them imperial units. They're just English units, guys, for like the civilized world. Right?
Thank you
Imperial
so
units, metric people call them imperial units, trying to degrade them, trying to connect them with the empire and all that badness. No, they're just
Canary in the
English units.
coal mine. Thank you so much. But okay, let me. So
Chat is roasting imperial units right now. 2.5 baseballs wide.
Okay. Let me get back on track. At least get the next thing. So okay, at least what was the Hellfire or the wild or whichever was the most recent. The whole point was it was a fully printed lower, very simple. So a lot of people were able to do it. Afterwards, it's kind of become interesting of what people, I guess, valued more specifically on their lowers. Because, one of the things I know a lot of people like about the Firebolt, myself included, is the modularity of, okay, I don't need to reprint certain things. I can really, if I just want to make my AR-15 lower and AR-9 lowers, I just really need to swap against the Magwell bit. That's pretty much
That is nice. Yeah, I like that actually. That's nice.
It's nice that I don't have to reprint everything because it's basically the same thing really. I just need to make sure I change out that buffer also. But
that feature was a fever dream, by the way. I came up with that in the middle of the night where it's like, you know what, I should just make the whole rear assembly universal, and then it spent like 4 hours at like 2 a.m. modeling.
It's something I like, but I know it was a Hoffman. You were saying you at least want to get closer to at least as close to mil spec, I guess, as you could, right?
In what? Not really. In what way?
Well, I mean, I guess what is? I mean, I'll let you actually explain. What is your design philosophy? What are you trying to
Well,
accomplish with it?
So I want it to be obviously not break. I want it to be very strong.
Right.
And then
yeah.
I want it to be streamlined, slim, and smooth. So I'm actually not a big fan of the way mil-spec lowers are designed. That they're casting them and then forging them. So in theory, they could make the mil-spec lowers at no additional cost. They could make them smooth and streamlined without all those dumb little projections they have on them, but they don't. So I'm not a huge fan of kind of the mil-spec design philosophy myself. So I'm just going for more. I want it to be smooth and organic with no sharp edges. It's kind of what I'm going for.
You know, I guess Ivan too. What is specifically you trying to design with the UBAR in particular then?
Shit, I just wanted to make it strong enough I could do push-ups on it and then do like dumb stuff with it, like throw it, overhead chops with it, and
he wanted to style on fucking people on Twitter with fucking push-ups. That's all he wanted to do.
That's pretty close. And I mean,
I guess all of 2020 was.
I guess to some extent, with that. Like considerations for the fact that it's going to be printed, so you have it sit on the bed in a way that warp won't end up killing its chances of working and these sorts of things, but. There was not, admittedly, Hoffman's lowers look a whole heck of a lot better because they have like a natural sort of very ergonomic, smooth look on them. And then the UBAR, you can tell it's kind of like the orc solution where there's a lot of jagged edges and it's like, oh, okay, it's there, I guess.
That brings up the kind of a question I had, and that is and this is both for Spooky and Ivan. Are you guys, your designs completely like scratch built in CAD, or are you taking older step models you had and then just modifying them?
Mine is modified.
Yours, okay. So that's Ivan's. Or that's Spooky.
That Spooky said that. So I guess Spooky, you want to talk about at least the modified?
Yeah, let's hear that, and the kind of the way you do the design.
Yeah, so I was going through the FrostCAD one day. This is how I found the lower, because I remember seeing a picture of the lower one day in the keybase. I saw it and I was like, what the hell is this? And someone said, oh yeah, that's in the FrostCAD. So I dug around for it forever because nothing in there is labeled. It's all AR-15 and then the author, and that's it. Nothing's labeled like bolt up or anything. So I finally found it. And that was the one I started printing and screwing around with. And then I finally started to actually CAD it myself, and I adjusted it and added some things. And then that's when I started adding like the U-bolt stuff. So I use those files to base my lower.
So are you still running from like modified step files?
Not necessarily. So like now that I'm doing a lot of magazines, like the AR-10, I had to model that from scratch. I'm going to be modeling the AK-74 mag from scratch. I just modeled the new AK-47 mag basically from scratch, and I did the new AR mag from scratch as well. So a lot of these are mags that are from scratch. For the Glock one, I'm still using the Menendez frame and modifying that one. And yeah, I'm also working on a Mini 13 conversion.
So I've tried. I want to ask Ivan the same question about. So are you running like completely native CAD, or are you modifying an older step file you had?
So for the U-Bolt Vanguard, it was still pretty close in terms of outside dimensions to the Vanguard. But for the UBAR, I went through and like completely defeatured the thing down to like a bunch of dumb rectangles, so there was no fillets, and everything was 90 degrees relative to each other. So essentially tore it down to the point where it was just critical geometry, and then went back together and put all of the things where they needed to be for that, because editing on top of fillets is of course very not fun.
Yeah, so that, and the reason I bring it up is because I've a couple times tried doing modifying designs, and I've always abandoned it because I find it's incredibly difficult. Like, so everything I do is always scratch modeled, because trying to work around an existing design is really like, it's really like, it's very aggravating. So that I think a reason, so one reason my lowers are so blended together is simply because I always scratch model them rather than trying to do any modification. So that's interesting.
Yeah, no,
go ahead, Adrian.
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, it's just kind of always interesting too, just seeing the different, like, Hoffman's, yours is always, a lot more streamlined. They're a lot more like, it definitely looks.
And a question for Spooky, what are your thoughts on surface modeling?
If I knew how to do it, I would tell you.
Okay. Yeah. It's not. It's you just have to have a.
We touched
computer.
on it in school for like a whole week, and then it was just like that's it. That's surface model. I was like, I'm never gonna remember.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've been struggling. I've been struggling with it on on all my designs. So yeah, it's definitely helpful though compared to trying to do complex blended curves with solid modeling. You can get once you figure it out. It takes a lot of revisions, but surface modeling definitely is a big help, especially with my new AR upper. That's the whole upper is all surface modeled to get it to blend properly. So
Well, actually, I will actually ask that too. But let me at least just go through at least everyone here. At least, Ivan, what CAD or software do you use?
Mostly Inventor, but it's like one of those things where you do this for long enough and you end up speaking all of the languages. So I guess I'm almost fluent in SolidWorks. I'm fully fluent in NX11. I guess UG as well because they're the same. And I guess I can drive around in CATIA. I can do enough in CATIA that I'm dangerous. So I shouldn't be trusted, but can use CATIA. Once you figured out one, you end up figuring out all of the others in short order as you've got your different stuff to do. And if you have all of these softwares available to you, it is nice because like surfacing in CATIA is a dream. It's super easy. CATIA is very intuitive for surfacing. Everything else it sucks at though. It's just like terrible for anything else. So for some of the stuff on the Glock work, they're on the backstrip of the Glock. That is a surface. That's not something that you could maybe somebody could solid model surface that, but that would be very difficult. So that was all done using surfacing tools.
And that's another. That's not to change the subject. I have several questions for Ivan, especially related to the MP5 and those builds. But about the pistol frames. So what's the origin of the Glock pistol frames that we're all using today?
Oh geez, so that's a story. I guess it dates back to like the very early days of FOSCAD, like 2013, 2014. There was a guy who sort of measured a Glock frame using calipers and then put a 22 conversion slide on it, and it sort of just worked because those don't have locking blocks and there's almost no stress on them. And he used printed rails on that, and it just worked pretty well. That file was uploaded to FOSCAD, but it was one of those things where like in the early days, people didn't really like refine their designs past the point of I could hand fit this to a working gun. So like with enough hand fitting, yes, you too could put a 22 conversion slide on this thing and then use it. And then we fast forward to 2018, there wasn't really any activity on Glocks. And then a guy on Reddit, the source of all drama and evil, a guy on Reddit, posts this thing saying like he's done the first 3D printable 9mm Glock frame. And it's like a bunch of hullabaloo, and then everybody on Reddit's freaking out, like, oh my God, does that even work? Is that even possible? And the guy's talking about how he used metal 3D printing to do like essentially a Polymer 80 style locking block rail combo of his own design. And that there was some talk about him trying to commercialize it and files weren't going to be released. And so everybody was like, oh, okay, who cares? And so that sort of like a couple days after that post was made, Freeman Don't Ask 1776 messages me on Twitter and he says, hey, did you see this? And I was like, yeah, I saw it. And he's like, that's not the first 9mm Glock frame. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he sends me a video, and this was in winter. And of course he lives in the US somewhere. And this was in winter, and he sent me a video very obviously from sometime in summer. So I guess the summer before, where he had a Glock that was very obviously 9mm, and he was just chugging through rounds on the thing. And I'm like, well, what the heck? And my first question is like, well, how did you do the rails? Surely you didn't do some ridiculous like metal printing using the printer that you have at work. And he's like, well, no, I sort of made this like simple little U shape for the front rail. And for the back rail, he just printed them integrally. And he said he had like a couple hundred rounds on this frame. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. So I get, the big problem though, is he had done all of this on, I think, FreeCAD and on his MacBook, and his MacBook died. Like got wet and the hard drive couldn't be saved. And so he lost all of his work. So all he had left was like some step files of this. So he goes back and remakes the frame in solid model according to the dimensions from the step file, which is like never a fun experience. Doing the same thing twice is never fun, especially when it's that tedious. But he goes and gets it back to that point, but he's got no step files or no reference for the rails that he made. So he and I sort of go back and forth over the span of like 2 or 3 months, and you develop that front rail spec, and that front rail spec was great. The rear rail spec, though, he was vying for, we just do printed integral rails. The problem is I'd had a gun that I had printed integral rails on, probably about 300 rounds on the frame, and then the right side rail cracks. And if anybody is familiar with Glocks and the way they work, you'll get a Glock that was like going bang, and then you release the trigger, and then bang, and you release the trigger, then because the rail cracks and it lets the slide lift off the sear, and then it shoots so long as the trigger's held down. So that was like a pants shitting moment. So I go back inside trying to figure out why it works like that. But we decided we're going to have to do something that's like more permanent than just printed plastic rails. So the solution we came up with was like those horrible screwed in rear rails, which is like not a great design. But whenever you consider the environment we were in, then is we were designing something that was like a rail system you could make at home. And the front rails would be tricky to machine at home. But I ended up making one. It's going to sound like I'm exaggerating. I used a Dremel tool, hand files, and a circular saw. And I made a front rail, the U-shaped front rail out of aluminum for those Glocks. And it worked great. Put hundreds of rounds through it. It did fine. So like it totally is home DIY-able. It's just maybe takes a little bit of intuition. Meanwhile, the rear rails, we are trying to stick with something that was home DIY-able. So like the complex U-shaped stamped one isn't really something you can do easily at home without it being like, again, it's a science fair, like using circular saws to cut aluminum for the rail that I had done. So that was a solution we came up with. Admittedly not the best, but as far as the DIY solution goes, it might be one of the best. At least for that time, it was better than the nothing. Your options was nothing or a gun that randomly turns full auto when it decides it wants to. So the screw-in rear rails weren't great. So Freeman Don't Ask had sort of originated this CAD then himself, essentially starting a model from scratch. And then he ended up doing, he and I tag teamed the 17, and then he did the 19 and 26 frames, from that of his own design, starting with the rail spec that we designed together, and then doing those frames on his own. And then he ended up doing a couple of polymer 80 based frames as well. And those took a little bit of hand fitting. Those didn't quite get as refined as the DIY versions. But at this time, you couldn't buy polymer 80 rails. The only way you could get polymer 80 rails is you bought a frame. And we both emailed Polymer 80 saying, like, we'll buy a bunch of rails and then set up a shop to sell them. And Polymer 80 was like, no, you will not, because we will not sell you rails. So that was sort of the way things were then. Since Polymer 80 sells rails, which is it's a very novel thing. Like, had that been a thing in 2018, that would have been great. But yeah, eventually, like, Outfit starts selling the rails for the Glocks that you can drop in the frames. The rail vendors show up. First Spooky rails, and then Riptide rails, and then Aves, and now there's tons of them at this point. And they're all great and wonderful.
So the current like Chairman One Glock frames, are they still based off of those original
sort of
FMDA designs?
So whenever we eventually hit a point, we were like, the screwed in rear rails are like not good, and we have these rail vendors, Riptide and Aves, who are like manufacturing geniuses, and they can make us the U-shaped one-piece rear rails. So we don't have to like stick with this screwed in crap anymore. Plus, I'd heard from Aves multiple times, he's tired of breaking tapping the threads into those rails. He showed me a picture because he'd sold quite a few of these rails at this time, but it was like a box of like at least 100 broken taps for these little M2.5 taps.
Yep.
And he was like, you have to save me. I'm going to have a retirement fund in scrap metal, and the scrap metal is just broken taps. So I sort of go back to the drawing board. Freeman Don't Ask didn't have a lot of availability, so I sort of took a model that was like that Freeman Don't Ask put together as a reference model for sort of a Polymer 80 style rear rail, adapted it so that it could be a little bit more manufacturable, and so that the specs were dead on for what we needed. Printed some versions of it just to make this for fitment test purposes. Although you could shoot, I did shoot with the PLA version of the Polymer 80 rear rail, and it did work rather well. Even it showed no signs of wear after like 100 rounds, but. We ended up working with Riptide and Aves to get those rear rails made, but the frame CAD itself ended up, because Freeman Don't Ask wouldn't be available, I took that on myself. So I started from his Polymer 80 frames because I much preferred the grip angle and the grip of like the standard Polymer 80 grip without the finger grooves and without the checkering and texturing. And I liked the grip angle of the Polymer 80 much better as well. It fit my hand perfectly, so I wanted to sort of stick with that. Plus, it's a blank slate, so whenever people want to come and modify it, they don't have a lot of like ham fisting to do to get rid of finger grooves and thumb rests and all these sorts of crap. So that sort of became the DDXX.2, so the 17, 19, and 26 frames. That's sort of where they came from. So we wanted to make things more robust with that rear rail, and then try and stick to the front rail spec that existed if we could. We weren't able to do that with the 26, but we did manage to do that with the 19 and the 17. So that was cool. So people only needed new rear rails. But the frame itself started out as FMDA's P80 version of the frame that I essentially completely gutted all of the interior geometry from. So I kept his outside geometry more or less, changed it, tweaked it in a couple places, and applied some new surfaces and areas to patch stuff up. Which, of course, if you go in, and Sherman 1 knows this, if you go and look in super close on those frames, there's a couple places where those surfaces, on the source CAD model, the surfaces aren't messed up. But when you export to step and then re-import it, the surfaces go like,
Yep.
and get all stupid. If you zoom in really close, the surfaces don't solve correctly, just because I guess the resolution of the mesh the steps are exported on.
I will say this, that this is wonderful. Specifically, also we have Chairman also in the chat as well. He's basically also said, Hoffman, he will gladly teach you on stream on this channel too about how to do our hard surfaces as well. But yeah, I will say, this is.
So I was gonna say that, Chairman, like, let me know when, like, in the near future, and I'll get you on a live stream, and we need to discuss this in more depth. Like,
the Glock stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't really know anything about the Glock stuff, so this is what Ivan's saying here is very interesting.
I just recently got my first Glock too, so I've been like actually forcing myself to learn about them because, dear God, do I hate the trigger with a passion. So, it's definitely, I've definitely gained at least more of a respect towards it to some extent. But at least a couple of things too. Let me just read the chat a bit too. I see also Nitrate says no super chat option. Yeah, no, we can thank Vice for that. The most recent, the stream I did most recently with like the Vice one with PSR on it. Yeah, they didn't like that, so I got my channel back, but I lost monetization afterwards. Apparently, I can do whatever. I can make fun of anyone. You make fun of Vice, enough times, and you get enough views. Then that's where YouTube draws the line now. But yeah, that was either way. I do see some people. Yeah.
So
go ahead.
One more question for Ivan. Okay, so your set me builds and your MP5, your barrel. What's the origins of your barrel mount? And the reason I bring this up is because on my latest 3D printed AR-15 lower, my original intention was kind of ridiculous. It was to split the entire lower into two pieces and then like clamp it back together.
Yep.
And then after building your MP5 and actually using it, I decided to go with your barrel mount method, which is using a two-piece barrel mount, which I think is a great idea. It really works well. And it has, especially for an AR-15, it has a lot of advantages as far as isolating the gas tube and all of that. So what's the origins behind that barrel mount?
So this is like more deep lore and fun stories, I guess. So I was in the Fudbusters Discord late one night, and I was talking with Matt from Fudbusters, Matt LaRosier, who's also FPC Matt, who's also Fudbusters Matt. People get confused there, thinking it's different Matts.
No.
But it was there just talking with him, and we were talking about 3D printable projects and stuff. And he mentions that he's had like a set me kit since they first came into the country. He bought one whenever they first came in, like 15 years ago or whatever. And it's just been sitting there because he hasn't really wanted to build it. And we were talking about like the printed bending jigs that exist. And he was like, "Do I know anything about them?" And I'm like, "No, I've never used them, but I've seen people have done builds with them and they worked okay." And he was like, "Oh, that's interesting." And he's like, "What if you just printed the receiver?" And I was like, I don't know, man. It doesn't seem worth it. I don't really care. And then he's like, "Okay, but like, if you did do it, how would you do it?" And like, he eventually like goads me into like, we sort of like tag team it as he goads me on into like, "But if you would, how would you do this? But how would you do this? How would you tackle this part of it?" And then in like about 30 minutes, we realized like we've just designed this entire receiver in voice chat on Discord. And so then I hop into CAD and I throw the thing together. But he and I were like, the two things we were really concerned about is how you hold the stock on, because of course it's stopping the bolt, and then how you hold the barrel in. So we were going back and forth on barrel retention methods, and he held his kit, and he'd already done the D-mill on his kit, so he just had the trunnion there. And so we were sitting there looking at the trunnion, and we were like, "Well, it's got a nice hourglass shape. Like if you could just sort of like clamp that hourglass shape into the receiver." And we were like, "Okay, maybe you could clamshell it." It sort of got that shape. And then I'm like, "But dude, a clamshell receiver that's like 2 feet long, that's going to be ridiculous." Especially because we realized we're gonna have to do the receiver in 2 parts, so it's like a 4-piece clamshell. And we were sitting there like that's just not the best. And then we were like back and forth, and then I was like, "Okay, well, like let's just clamp the trunnion itself in its own tiny little clamps, and then stuff those into the front of the receiver." And then we sort of go back and forth on that, and then I lay it out in CAD, and then I have him measure off some dimensions off the trunnion, And we're sitting there looking at it, and we're like, dude, this is totally going to work. And it probably took about an hour to have the rough CAD laid out. And then I went and printed those test models. And after one revision on those test models, I printed a 2-wall, 25% infill front and rear receiver. And the fitment test on that, like the trigger guard didn't want to go on because that was like the last thing that was tricky to get the trigger guard in the right place and tricky to get the mag catch in the right spot. But everything but those two pieces fell into place perfectly, and the bolt slid nicely in the channel, and the barrel felt like dead solid, rigid held in the receiver, even at 25% infill. And so I was sitting there looking at this like, I'm going to go shoot it. And so I ran out into the backyard, and I sort of set the rifle on the table and then fired the first round like semi-remote, like my face wasn't next to the gun, my hand was still on the trigger, and then bang, fired the first round, and then check it for cracks, and it's like, oh, I didn't expect that to work. And so then I end up tearing through probably about 20 more rounds, shoulder firing it then, and then at the end of that, like looking at it, like this didn't break, and you can see in some of the slow-mo video like there are like pieces of orange plastic chipping off of this thing because it's flexing so much under recoil because that's a very violent action that at 25% infill, it flexes enough that little bits of plastic that, I'd sort of like clearanced off of there were breaking. And then, the ejector on those guns is ran by the bolt. So it cams over pretty hard. And I didn't clearance the ejector enough in CAD. So the ejector itself on the first couple of rounds is karate chopping the lower and then busting off plastic there. So it's an interesting thing because then whenever I went to watch the slow-mo back, it's like there's pieces of plastic flying off, like little bits of plastic raining from my gun. Well, why is this happening? Oh, yeah, because it's 25% infill and took a little bit of Dremel tool fitting to get everything to drop together. And the trigger group was held on by zip ties at that point. So
wow. Yeah, so that's really interesting. That's okay. That's interesting. Yeah. So that barrel mount specifically is a really good way of doing it. It's a really great idea. So
it did come together really well because like you get the benefits of a clamshell system without your whole receiver having to be clamshelled. And it's one of those rare situations where like your first idea is actually not your worst idea, because usually, at least for me, my design philosophy is your first idea is your worst idea. So once you test out your first idea and it's a horrible failure, just completely abandon it until you've tested out whatever your other ideas are. But in this case, like it just worked great. And then through accuracy testing and heat deflection testing, like it does much better than I had ever hoped. Yeah. So it was sort of a cool thing to see.
As someone who's built one, I will say, as someone who's built the SetMe, in fact, that was something I was really shocked to. I mentioned my video specifically about the SetMe was, I think you and Ivan, you and Matt had your own little like hour-long video too, where you basically were discussing specifically like the whole barrel mount situation. Because that was for me like when I was looking at how the SetMe actually works, like that, I was shocked with how well that held up and how good it was. Like it didn't. The barrel didn't move too much. It wasn't like it wasn't flexing that. It was really good.
Right.
But go ahead. You were saying something, Hoffman. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the one other question I had was on and I've not built the SetMe, so I've only built the MP5. So on your barrel mount, you have a cross bolt that kind of locks the barrel mount in place. Yep. Why did you do that rather than just having the handguard hold the barrel mount in?
So technically on the MP5, you can do it without that screw in. The handguard does hold the barrel mount at least enough. My concern was, and it dates back to the SetMe and the MP5 receivers, like again, with my tendency to modify existing files rather than just make scratch ones, that MP5 was literally just I took the Amigo, the SetMe, defeatured it, and just shrank it down to the MP5 specs. So that step file's origin, and there are some dimensions you can go back in there and find. It's like this is the exact same as the SetMe because it literally was the SetMe once upon a time. And when I first shot that SetMe, I hadn't designed a handguard system yet at all. So there was nothing holding that in except those sort of cross pins and screws. So I sort of held that over on the MP5 because as well, whenever I first made my first test version of the MP5 didn't have a handguard at all. It was just the receiver to sort of test out, is this even possible? So that cross pin was there for that reason. And then also maybe somebody else will be like me and stupid enough to shoot it without a handguard and to keep their barrel from becoming a projectile going downrange. It's included there for those reasons.
Okay. Yeah, because on my AR upper, I didn't do any of that because I just have the handguard holding it together. And I was wondering, okay, that makes sense. So the one, obviously the biggest complaint with the MP5 design is the way that the handguard and all the parts kind of connect together with the locking flanges. You have flanges with bolts. So what I basically just copied your MP5 design for my AR upper, as far as the actual mechanics go. And the only difference only different thing I've done is my barrel mount. I'm using this. I came up with this little, I don't know if you saw it, this little clip attachment method. It uses a hose clamp to hold the handguard on.
Oh yeah, I'd seen that.
Okay, yeah. So that, and that's, it seems really strong. I don't know. So I'm just trying to see a more streamlined way we could attach handguard, because I would actually really like to do a remix of the MP5 and try to make it a little more slim.
If it's doing handguard only stuff, I think you could definitely get away with like an attachment method that's a little bit looser, but especially with the SETME, but certainly with the MP5 to some extent with the MP5, because you've also got a charging handle retained there. It needs some manner of rigidity, because any misalignment in that tube, and then your charging handle wants to bind. And
Exactly,
with the SETMEs, the bolt, because it has a locking claw on the bolt, and so unlocking that's very difficult. There's an extreme amount of force required to fold that charging handle out, and that force is all reacted from the end of the handguard. So that handguard on the SETME needs a very strong connection to the main receiver itself.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, at least for me, that was kind of the big thing for me, at least me and the SETME too, was that was kind of the bigger point for the whole, like, when I built the SETME and everything too, I was more interested, or that was the thing I kept hearing too with a lot of people is, oh, well, this won't really do much for anything. It's just one specific thing. Well, there was a lot of good things in the SETME, specifically the barrel mount. I thought was absolutely incredible.
Incredible.
And it's one of those things I think people don't really understand, specifically with a lot of these designs coming out, is, while something might be very specific for this one thing, people can still use those ideas for other things altogether. Like the Biden's Bane, what I remember too is that they used a similar thing too as with the SETME or barrel mount system of how they held the barrel as well. It's it's not or might not necessarily be something or in use right now, but someone might see something like that and be able to create something from it. I see you also are sharing something, Hoffman. Want me to go pull that up for you too?
Yeah, this was just the barrel mount.
Yeah.
This is just the barrel mount on my AR, and this is obviously it's just half of it, but it's exactly the same as Ivan's MP5. It's just half of it, and I can print it from carbon fiber nylon, and it isolates the rest of the receiver from the barrel, which is the big thing. It really helps. And I did have heat issues after 100 rounds with my upper, but the idea is I can make this entire barrel mount larger and make the whole upper a little bit wider, and then the heat transfer will go down significantly as it gets wider. So I really like the barrel mount method. The history of that was interesting. I think it's a really brilliant idea. It's definitely going to be used in a lot of firearms moving forward.
Well, yeah, no, that's how I view it too. But I've been saying something too.
So yeah.
Well, yeah, I also kind of want to mention some things too. I see people saying throw Chairman the link. Guys, this is, I guess if anything, this is supposed to be more of an AR stream. Look, Chairman lives like 20 minutes away from me. I can easily do a stream with him. Don't worry. If we want to talk about Glocks, we could do. I will gladly do a stream with Chairman about Glocks and everything too, and then I guess CAD modeling as well. But yeah, it's okay. But this goes to the next point of anything too. Of I guess I'm not sure how much longer you have, Hoffman.
Yeah, a little bit.
So yeah, I might as well go to this part because this is, I guess, this kind of leads, I guess, to like the final part of anything then of what I at least wanted to get to. I didn't want to keep this too long, but you're talking about, I guess, your upper and stuff like that. This kind of goes where I was hoping to talk about. Where do we at least see the next thing of, or it feels like with a lot of the AR lowers, we kind of have all of them pretty much will work. None of them are going to break. They're all pretty much durable. What is the limit, or what is our next limitations, I guess? Because what can we really do next? What are we really waiting for?
So first of all, well, I mean, obviously belt feds. I mean, that's obviously the next step.
Yeah.
As far as current designs go, there's a huge amount of refinement that can still be done, especially with my lowers. I mean, there's a lot of work I need to do. And then there is AK-47 mag lowers. There's lots of different variations and options that need to be done. And all of that stuff requires a lot of time and work. So there's lots of stuff that can be done in the current design environment without necessarily pushing boundaries. So there's a lot of kind of boring bread and butter stuff that kind of needs to get done. And that does require a lot of time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, the biggest thing I saw that's a big step, or at least one of those things where most people, that aren't really so entrenched in a lot of the like the CAD work and or all this stuff. It's the 3D printed upper was one of those things that that was like that's one of those things that everyone kind of just accepted it was basically impossible. Kind of like what Ivan was saying. Oh, you can only shoot. You can't shoot a full magnum. Okay, well you can't shoot 2 mags. Okay, well you can't do push-ups on it.
We just shot 90 rounds, so
right, yeah. So
Biden's Bane. How many rounds do you have on that, Ivan? I think
so. I
in your meltdown, how many did you fire?
Wasn't mag dump, but I was able to do 180 rounds of sustained fire, and 60 of that the gun retained 0. But between 60 and 90 rounds, I noticed like, hey, this thing's hitting low, and by 180 rounds, it was hitting like 10-foot low of target.
Yeah, if with a few improvements and then just using a better material, either annealed PLA or an annealed nylon,
right?
3D printed the structure, 3D printed uppers structurally are completely sound. It's simply a thermal issue at this point, really.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured too.
Yeah. So the Biden's Bane, it seems to me to be kind of thrown together like it's a little. It seems like a quick remix sort of. It is obviously it's kind of like a prototype stage, but it's obviously proves. I mean the potential that it's just a thermal issue at this point.
Right, and for limited use on an upper. So somebody was asking like, if I wanted to 3D print a gun for hunting, how would I do that? And so what I pitched to them is you get a 350 Legend upper or 350 Legend barrel, and you build it out on a Biden's Bane, and you can have yourself like it'll either weigh like 3.9 pounds or just over 4 pounds. You can have yourself a hunting AR, which is like a really fantastic setup to have yourself in. And if you're just feeding it from like 5 or 10 round mags anyway, you'll have a much harder time overheating it, as well as if you're hunting with it, you'd have a hard time overheating it. So within the bounds of understanding, it's literally just a PLA upper with the minimum of metal reinforcement. It's certainly both a great proof of concept and given the sort of things that you would be wanting to use a printed upper for anyway, it does what it needs to. Because if you're relying on a printed upper to save you, defend you, or do some sort of, it wouldn't even make sense for a 2-gun match. But like if for some reason it was the only thing you had to grab for your defense, if it was like a Glock or an AR with a printed upper, I'd probably feel better with the AR with the printed upper because I know I've got 30 rounds, and then by that time I can then reach for the Glock or whatever.
Yeah. So yeah, my goal with the upper is I want to be able to have like an upper as my home defense gun. Like I want it to be like that reliable and everything. So. Right. Yeah, we want to be able to do like force reset, like a couple hundred rounds, and then.
I have one of those built too. I've had a couple of fun, or I've tried my best to get the ones working with mil-spec lowers. I still need to find a range that actually will let me do that. It's the downside of living in Texas. There's no public land you can just do that in. Huh. But yeah, I mean, I guess if anything, it seems more like or if we could basically get a good, something like PLA or something that's more thermally resistant, that would probably open a lot of doors, if anything.
Well, and I think Hoffman's adapting the, because like one of the initial philosophies with the Amigo Grande's barrel mounts was, we could print these in nylon, and then you have the heat resistance of a nylon for your barrel mount, but the rest of your receiver can be PLA, so that way you're not spending like $40 crapping out this receiver in expensive material.
And I think that's a really attractive. That's just another really attractive advantage of that.
And I think Hoffman has perfectly adapted that here to his AR, where with the Biden's Bane test we saw, PLA is just not a great material to be mounting. At least with the Amigo, you have a great big flange. With the MP5, it just doesn't get very hot because 9mm is not nearly as hot around. But with an AR, with as thin as the Biden's Bane is and as lightweight as it is at the front, it doesn't take much heat for it to sort of start to get soft. And so Hoffman's essentially in a mil-spec footprint, it appears, with his upper, managed to sort of improve on that because you can have the heat isolation or the heat resistance that a full nylon upper would normally bring just by printing the barrel mounts themselves out of nylon.
Yeah. So the big limitation I had with my upper, the failure mode, was mostly on the handguard, but the PLA, and this is Polymaker PLA Pro, it did actually, it ended up enough heat conducted through the nylon that it softened. And I had a picture right here. You can kind of see where it was softening up a little bit. So I think just making that barrel mount larger and then possibly using like 50% infill, which will really help add air gaps in there. I think it would help a lot. But you're still with ARs, the radiation off the gas tube and barrel is extreme. So I don't think there's any way to get around having to use a different material for the handguard. I do not think PLA is going to work for a handguard on a practical weapon that you can use extended firing. So I think annealed PLA or annealed nylon are going to be going to be needed for the handguard. But a handguard structurally needs to be strong, but it can be printed, I think, with minimal plastic to keep costs down. So I think there's that's going to require thought. I'm not sure about the upper receiver, whether that's going to require nylon or not with a larger barrel mount, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, well, I guess if anything too, then I guess might as well. Or it's around an hour and 30 minutes. I've enjoyed. I like how at least how I feel like there's a lot of things right in a short enough time. I don't want to keep it too long specifically because I think this is good enough for most people to be able to share it. So I guess, I might as well, ask specifically, what are you guys doing? At least, what are the next steps for your AR lowers, if anything? Because I know at least Spooky's been working on a lot of magazines, which, by the way, I did try the AK mag. It works fantastic, by the way. It uses an AR-15
Thank you,
mag,
sir.
which is really, really nice because it uses an AR mag, which is really convenient to get.
All of them use that spring.
But
shop at RK Spookware.
But I guess let me go ask
Not affiliate.
because I know I think you were working on the 308 version of the UBAR, right? And that
like,
that.
For whatever reason, whenever you mentioned like, what comes next for printable lowers, I'm like, oh yeah, well AR-10 lowers like bigger calibers, and I was like, hang on, all three of us have that already.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, that's
true.
That's kind of the thing.
Oh wait, I forgot that we've all done that. Oops. But
yeah, it's been like a year or so.
Yeah, that's the fun. That's kind of the thing. Is like, what is the there's a 308. Each of you have your own version of a 308, which that's always fun because people, including myself, if you didn't know that, by the way, 308 ARs are not the same thing. Like they're not all. There's a lot more variability with the designs for those ones.
There is, yeah.
Yeah, I bet you guys could probably talk for much longer, specifically about the joys that was guessing each of the measurements for all your different 308 lowers.
Yeah, that took a while to work out. That was pretty much just trial and error, sort of.
Yeah.
There's no good specs.
But well, I stopped you. What were you saying?
Oh, but I guess what am I working on next for AR lowers? I guess not a bunch. I guess I did post about it today. Like I've forgotten things that I did like 2 hours ago. My mind is completely wasted anymore.
I know the feeling.
Huff too many PLA fumes and you lose your mind. But I'm working on a version for the UBAR so it can take rifle buffer tubes, because the current version sort of can, but it's not reliable. But I'm going to make a dedicated version that can take rifle buffer tubes. And this is because I managed to gaslight myself into buying a Retro Colt A2 parts kit. So I'm which of course comes with the stock. So that'll be fun to put together.
It's pretty easy to modify normally. I did that for a couple of 308 lowers before deciding that rifle buffer tubes had no real advantage.
Which is about where I'm at, but I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it an interesting build to suit my strange tastes. But I do tend to agree. Other than for looks, there's no real point. And it should be a pretty easy conversion. But that's pretty much it as far as I'm working on AR stuff. Like I guess I haven't released my 308 lower yet, but don't really have any changes on that. It seems to be going really well in the beta. So I guess there's that, and then I guess the litany of other things that I work on that I constantly forget about. Like I'll walk downstairs in the morning and be like, "Oh, I was working on that this week. That's crazy. That was this week. It feels like a month ago."
But I guess I mean, I guess Hoffman, you're kind of showing what you're working on, at least with the big thing you're working with AR stuff. But I guess, is there anything else you kind of want to say?
Yeah. So I mean, if anyone is familiar with my latest LR308 lower, like the built-in support on it and the overall design aesthetics, I need to take my current super lower, AR-15 super lower at this point is actually really obsolete. It's got a lot of design kind of aesthetic issues, as well as the support's kind of obsolete. So I need to bring that all up to date. So that's kind of this bread and butter stuff like that takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I see someone mentioning about your sacrificing the Picatinny rail. And that's
strictly an aesthetic decision on my part. Other than you could actually, a continuous Picatinny rail would be super easy to do. If you wanted a full rail on top, you could. I feel that the only reason you have a full rail is if you wanted to put a laser on it. That's really about it. If you want a flashlight, put a side rail up front. And I don't think I'll probably put a little rail at the very tip of the handguard and then a place to put a button for a laser so that you can run night vision with it. But I mean, it's really a design decision. It's not really a sacrifice. That was an aesthetic decision I made for this gun. I had no intention of running night vision with it. So I just put a single rail on top.
God, I need the money for night vision first.
Yeah,
But
you do, yeah.
let me ask Spooky too. What are you specifically doing with at least the Firebolt or anything AR related?
Really, I think that ship is basically sailed. Ever since I left out, I think I tweeted about this recently. Ever since I put out Firebolt 2.0 and Thunderbolt 2.0, I haven't heard a single person come to me with an issue saying, "Oh, hey, this broke. Oh, hey, I had this problem." Blah blah blah. Like it's been completely radio silent on that side. So I've basically retired those projects as completed and working purely on Waffle 2.0 and getting mags out there. I've also been working on some side projects like the Spitfire. I have that at a pretty good spot. I'm just waiting for my prints to finish and to go get out and test it again, so I can actually start up a beta for that. And yeah, but most of it right now, I'm just doing a shitload of mag modeling.
Yeah, I think your magazine, Spooky, is probably your biggest. That's like, I need to print some of those. That's probably.
I get
those are pretty
so
cool.
much. There's so many people coming to me saying, "I love your mags." Blah blah blah. Like I get more than that than the Firebolt. Like people love the mags.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
really nice,
same
yeah.
here. Yeah, the Firebolts, it's bolt together, but the magazines, on the other hand, the magazines are cool. They're pretty innovative. I like the magazines.
I will say, Spooky, you're also working on a boltless. Well, it's printed bolt, if anything, magazine too. Which poor RK might be crying a little bit in the corner, but
It's okay. I don't worry. In bold print, I will put in the manual that I highly recommend the bolt together, and I recommend my Cambodian affiliate RK Spookware for the hardware. But yes, I am working on a fully printed style mag, and it's working. I haven't had any issues with my mags; they've been perfectly fine.
Well, yeah. Now let me just go look to see anything else because for me, I feel like we're kind of at that fun thing too of there's a lot of a lot of refinement, if anything, right now going with a lot of the AR stuff. The big thing I can only imagine besides like a full AR up or I don't really think I've seen anyone make a bullpup AR really. That's
There's been a lot of attempts.
There's been a lot of attempts. I think the only one I've seen that's 3D printed, I think it was a Wayfair. It's like one article from like 2017ish or 18 that's never been updated. Other than that, really, I feel like we're kind of at the point of we're reaching PLA's limits, if anything. But
I mean, to some
thermal resistance for like things like the upper, really.
Yeah. I think like bullpups is something that I'm not that interested in because they're bullpups are bullpups. They're not. I mean, they're cool. It'd be nice to have one, but I don't see them as any real tactical advantage.
The cool things about bullpups is they're like a litmus test for like guys who like guns versus guys who like shooting guns. Where like if you like guns, bullpups are awesome because they look cool, and if you like shooting guns, it's like, wow, the triggers universally suck. The length of pull is universally terrible. Even if you have long arms, it's like I feel like my arms are too short.
Try changing magazines.
Right, and then magazine changes is like scratching your armpit type stuff. It's just so weird.
I love the tar in Call of Duty. I don't know what you're talking about. I will gladly force myself to learn.
Bullpups are the best in Call of Duty. You don't understand.
You got the range.
Springfield make a new bullpup. What's that shit called?
The Hellion, the one that looks like the Halo battle rifle. Okay.
Yeah, like that's a step backwards, guys. Like let's come on, Springfield. Let's try to move forward.
At least it kind of looks like the battle rifle. If you put like an ACOG, you can get it. You can make a Halo gun. All right. Bullock made like the Halo like Magnum one. That's a cool thing. All right. I want my space gun. Okay. I like the space gun. But yeah. I mean, bullpups. You're completely right, Ivan. Yeah, they're the triggers alone are just, unless you're like shooting them in full auto, in which like in that case the progressive trigger, you don't realize how terrible it is. Kind of in semi-auto, it's just like you don't even get the benefit if you hold it down. You could shoot full auto. It's just well, I think they look cool at least, but.
Certainly do. The one exception, the one exception that I will allow to this is that the RPK should have always been a bullpup. The RPK as a bullpup gun would simply be perfect. And I curse myself for being left-handed because I probably would have made a Plastikov bullpup already. But the RPK as a bullpup, like if you just take the stock off of an RPK, right, and shoulder it, it's the perfect gun. Like your length of pull would be okay. It's still long, but acceptable. If you had a trigger, your trigger grip, pistol grip right where the current handguard is, and the gun balances so nice. And then you've got a 23-inch barrel and 7.62 by 39 through a 23-inch barrel hit significantly harder than from a standard 16-inch barrel. Like the RPK is a gun that probably didn't intend to, but it should have been a bullpup. And there are like I laughed about these things before I ever really got like I handled an RPK without a stock. I laughed at the fact that like in Idlib and in Pakistan and in the Khyber gunsmith areas, they like taking RPKs and making them bullpups. And I was like, haha, that's so stupid. They took the machine gun and then made it a bullpup. That's so dumb. Why would you do that? And then I held an RPK without a stock and shouldered, and I went, oh, I understand. I know exactly why, because the gun balances so nicely. So I will the one bullpup I'll accept and I'll admit to wanting to have is I want a bullpup, not my RPK kit at some point. I probably will. I'll just have to contend with the fact that as a left-handed person, my face is in danger from the bolt.
Yeah.
So guys, just be sure to remember this. You can harass Ivan every single day to remind him that he needs to make a bullpup RPK, and there's a chance you might be able to see that now. I don't really think there's really anyone else doing printed or AK stuff, so that's always that should be a stream. I kind of want to talk about that
too. We know how to do. We just got to get him in chat and just be like, "Hey, but Ivan, how would you do it? How would you?"
The trick.
And I really want to talk about AK. This is not the stream for it, but I also want to discuss AKs. I really need to do an AK. I just got to find parts, kits, all that. It's not like ARs. They're not quite so straightforward.
Cool.
I gotta
buy a kit. Fantastic. But yeah. Trust me, I'm glad to see a lot of people at least like hearing at least specifically about certain designs, getting a bunch of developers to talk about at least designs, people that are working on similar things, at least be able to talk about the designs, because it's always interesting hearing developers, you guys specifically talking about certain things that you guys were working on with your ARs and stuff like that. I'm guessing a lot of people like hearing that too. So I guess I'll have to definitely do this again at some point too, but at least I'm glad to see we all have a bunch of different other guns we want to talk about too. So I guess,
and specifically, the earlier, the Razorback, I can't find, like, if I had been doing all of this like 5 years ago, I'd have been so much better off, but you can't find any Razorbacks anymore. But we definitely need to do some sort of 3D printable belt fed 22. That's like high on the list of priorities. Like, we need one of those.
There are so many
gun that jams for fun. Is that what you're looking for?
They don't. They're remarkably reliable, actually. Compared to a magazine fed, they're pretty impressive weapons.
I truly, can we make or like one of those, like a 3D printed Kel-Tec or maybe like a Calico or something? That would be maybe.
Okay. Don't get me started. Don't get me started on that. Yes, we need helical magazines. The Calico had execution issues, and there's some things that needed to change, but helical magazines, absolutely. They're just incredibly awesome. It's like belt fed without having to have all the disadvantages of a belt.
But it looks so cool. Okay, it has the 80s movie aesthetic to it.
I hate the aesthetic. I'm talking about the magazine technology.
You don't like the ridiculous.
It's the aesthetic.
I mean, you can. It's the perfect sights too. Okay, why would you ever need It seems it's a very secure thing. I don't see a problem with the design.
The helical magazine needs to be around the barrel. The barrel needs to go through the middle of the magazine, obviously.
Now that would be it. They make it they kind of make it a bullpup almost. Well,
yeah. Well,
I guess quite. No. That'd be way forward. That'd be more forward than most people would be used to. I guess if it's going above. Yeah. I'm interested to pick your brand on that actually more than anything else now. But
there's several very interesting helical magazine designs, especially for 22 LR. So that's another subject. But I think high magazine capacity, like suppressive fire weapons in 22 with force reset triggers, I think is definitely something we need to work on.
So, I'm going to right now let the chat, go ahead and ask your last couple of questions. I'll probably, I'll probably give it maybe 5 more minutes if anything, but let me go ahead and scroll up to see a couple of these things too, because I've seen a couple people asking certain things as well. Might as well make sure I can get some of them taken care of. I see someone, Spooky, they're asking you about the Belladonna, your break action 3 or 38 special.
Oh my God. I'm so pissed. I took that out to shoot. It was perfect. The conditions were ideal. And I go to fucking shoot, and the goddamn firing pin didn't strike it light strike the fucking rounds every single time. I couldn't get it to shoot.
Yeah,
It was like the one time I was away from my fucking son.
it's for people that don't know, the belladonna is Spooky's. I guess it would be kind of, it's almost like a songbird type of like, level 3D printed gun where it's everything's mostly 3D printed. I think
Yeah.
you're putting a metal reinforcement in the back, and then you're using one other thing that's metal, but it's basically like an AR-15 fire control group and just everything printed.
The only thing metal in there, aside from the fire control group, is the metal chamber. It's like a 20 gauge adapter. A 20 gauge adapter for 38 special.
Yeah, and I see someone else asking, why didn't you ask any weeb stuff? Because no one asked that. It would have been funny, but no one asked any question. No one asked Hoffman what his favorite anime was. That would have been interesting, but no one did it. You don't feel the need to answer that. No one asked it. Someone's asking about a Plasticop PP19.
Give me a PP19 parts kit and I'll make you one. The usual
I don't know enough
answer.
about AKs.
The PP19 is like it's a precursor to the Vichaz, so it's just a 9mm direct blowback AK. The Plastikov would be very easy to adapt to become that. Really, you just need a parts kit, which is unobtainable. Because the PP19 and the Vichaz both had the serious detriment of coming about after the fall of the Soviet Union and its surrounding states. So like didn't have a massive glut of those parts kits being sold off for these states to have some way to make money. And so there's not thousands of them in the United States. And in fact, the AK kits as it is have like already dried up substantially.
I see someone also mentioning
we need another Soviet Union to fall so we can get more parts kits.
I'm hoping with maybe we might be able to get some AK-12s out of Ukraine. Who knows? Maybe some random imports. But I see some
get our billions of dollars back in guns.
Well, who knows? But I see someone saying North Korea has a helical magazine for their AKs. I don't know if that's true or not.
I saw that online. I don't think that's actually true. And I just wanted, I was going to bring that up.
But the North Koreans lie.
So there's a bunch of stuff on. There was some photographs online of the North Korean magazine, helical ones, and they got nothing but pure hate. And I thought that was just incredibly foolish. I thought it was a great idea. There's nothing wrong with it. And people are hating on them because they're commies and people like to hate on them. I think the idea is great and that we need to work on it. People hate on it for no good reason. And like, what, are you a weakling? You can't pick up like 150 rounds? I mean, come on, guys. Like,
I'm glad to know. Yeah, Hoffman is pro North Korea. North Korea is best Korea. Let me see. The next one too is there we go. Someone asked Hoffman, what is your favorite anime?
I was actually going to bring that up. I was going to specifically mention that to you, AG, and also to Spooky, that I don't really approve of the anime. I think that you guys need to work on rebranding a little bit.
That was someone asked me beforehand, were you going to do the same intro with Hoffman? And then I just laughed at them and said, of course I'm going to do it. And see if you even acknowledge.
I was debating, should I even go with AG Cast because of that intro? I decided, might as well give the guy one chance, right?
I found it. Yeah, it was a shame you turned off your camera. I was looking forward to seeing your face, but that's a shame. But oh well, there you go. There's Hoffman's answer. I think he's more of a High School of the Dead type of a guy. Okay, let me see what's the next one. Okay, we have PP19. What was this one? Oh, people are asking about the AUG, if anything. I guess maybe we should mention that because I guess that is the bullpup rifle, 5.56 rifle.
Yeah, I have the lathe back here, and the parts kits are cheap, so I really have no excuse. I need to I need to do an AUG. That looks like a fun. It's totally impractical, obviously, but it looks like a fun build. They use like weird magazines though, so I don't know about that.
Yeah, and then I guess I don't think anyone. I don't know. Spooky, I don't think any of us have built the AUG or anything, but yeah.
I have a kid. I don't have any money.
Oh.
I had designed my own, Matt and I and another fellow were sort of designing our own at one point in time, but we ended up getting to the point where it's like, by the time you're making custom barrels and all of this other stuff, the sort, at least the epiphany I had, I don't know that I managed to very convincingly convince the other people, but it was like, you're going to put in all of this work and it's going to cost so much more than an AR-15, and you're making a gun that is actually just a worse AR-15. And so I was like,
yeah,
if you want one that bad, but when it's all said and done, you're getting, well, the price has gone up on them now, but those Foxtrot Mike bufferless uppers were costing like, the first run of them was like $600 for a bufferless AR-15 upper. And I was like, for as much money and work as you're going to put in, you're not going to beat $600. You could just make your own little bullpup AR-15 lower and have literally a better gun. Trigger will be better. Everything about it will work nicer. You don't have to worry about the fact that like when it comes to the NFA compliance, AUG stocks are like
Well,
this weird dark zone where like the ATF really wants to make
Yeah.
all full auto AUG stocks machine guns, even if you modify them, and it's like a whole legal nightmare surrounds that. So I was
well,
like,
isn't the only reason you print an AUG is to get that functionality? That's why everyone was doing it. No.
to get the bullpupish, I guess, but I mean, you could get that so much cheaper and easier, and then more reliably.
Oh no, I meant this to like fire apart.
Oh, yeah, I suppose. Oh, and also a fun fact for all the federal agents listening: the full auto fire control groups that you have in AUGs can be put in the first gen F2000s, and then they become machine guns without any modifications. Or
Don't
so
get
I've
me
been
started
told.
on F2000, man. That's my favorite gun. Come on,
If you have a
man.
Gen 1 F2000, you can take the AUG full auto packs, and they'll do things.
Well, the more you know, if anything.
I
Also,
do
I
have a
see.
question for Ivan when
Go
he
ahead.
gets a chance. Okay, you posted a picture. I think it was like last week, or maybe it was this week, but it was of it was like a bushing inside of a 308 upper to make it so that the takedowns were 1/4 inch.
Oh, right.
Where the fuck did you get that? I need it so bad.
So it's on McMaster. I'm trying to remember what the nominal size. If you, I think the big UBAR beta is open if you want to just join it, but
the big UBAR. Okay.
I think it's 7/16 is the nominal size for AR-10 takedown pins, but it's on McMaster.
Number. It's
Yeah,
like
it's not
0.27.
it's one it's basically 1/8. It's the wackiest. It's the strangest. Whoever made that decision had something wrong with them.
Yeah.
They should have been
absolutely.
1/4 inch. There's no stress on those pins.
And so
yeah.
What on McMaster you can get 7/16 outside diameter, 1/4 inch inside diameter brass shim stock, and so I just sort of like installed that shim stock in the upper, and so then it becomes a 1/4 inch pin takedown system. And
did you try just printing those bushings? I mean, if
you
could
can,
get it,
but it's a very thin wall, so it ends up coming
Yeah.
out to be like one wall, and I could potentially foresee that cracking. And like a foot length of the shim stock on McMaster was like $3 or $4. So I was like, okay. Then.
Gotcha.
This is no big deal. And because it's brass, you can cut it easily with a Dremel tool and sand it down so it's a nice slip fit, and then it's held up fantastically so far. So I do like that over like trying to stick the big pins in there. What's that?
Oh, talking to AG, sorry.
Oh, what were you saying, they?
Check Twitter.
Okay, well, I also see someone mentioning too how hard would it be to make a bufferless AR. That's gas piston, right?
Well, now that we're making our own uppers, it wouldn't be hard at all. That's sort of the funny part.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, go ahead and mention that then. Yeah.
Yeah.
You could just take a bolt carrier. Well, because like the Daewoo, like the Daewoo K2 or it's like the K100 is the civilian name, I think. It essentially uses an AR-15 bolt carrier group, but they cut everything behind the firing pin off of it, and then they put a gas piston on it. But you could just do that same thing where you cut the rear of the bolt carrier off of an AR-15 fire control group. Because you can print your own upper, you can put whatever sort of dual recoil spring guide roddy stupid system behind that you'd like to give it the added resistance that you're losing in mass there in spring pressure. So it's totally possible, and you could just like turn an AR-15 bolt carrier group into like an AR-18 bolt carrier group more or less by doing that. So like it's totally possible now that we're printing our own uppers. It's just one of those things where it hasn't been touched on yet, but certainly will.
I would just exactly. That's very true. There's a lot of potential there. But my question, of course, was why is everyone obsessed with the bufferless upper so much? Like that integrated like stock. That's like why you have an AR-15. It's
Don't you want a side folder though?
Yeah, like why? Like your stock's just little short stock, and you're good to go.
But you can, but it's tactical if you can side fold it. It makes it more assaulty.
I don't know. I just the side folders are cool on like an MP5. I mean, like just for the historic benefit. But as far as a practical weapon, I don't understand the number of people who enjoy side folders as much as they do.
I like it just because it's fun to have it. It looks cool when you just shoot it like with one hand, then you pull out the side fold it up, and now you have it against you. But I guess let me show this thing for Spooky. This is, I guess, your AR-47. You want me to show this?
Yes, sir.
And I guess you want to say anything else before this? I guess this will probably be the last thing we say, if anything. Then.
Yeah, I got
Yeah. No, I understand that.
Quite literally just missing the mag release. That's literally it.
Okay.
I just have to model it. I was like, I should remodel the AK mags because I was already gonna do that before I model this mag release because I want it to fit.
So I can't decide if the lower is more interesting or the magazine. I think the magazine is the interesting achievement here myself.
I have
I
it, and
went
I
with
can tell you
a
it's great.
brand new
Yeah.
geometry for it, and it looks freaking awesome.
So
Yeah,
I shot 30 rounds through it pretty quickly. No issue so far.
We're getting mentions of magnets in the chat right now. For
well,
the AG.
that's either this is going to have to be another possible stream. I'm glad we had everyone here. By the way, thank you so much, everyone that showed up. Ivan, Hoffman, Spooky. This was a really fun stream. I guess we have a lot of other topics. We guess a lot of people want to mention things. We could probably talk about a lot of other things, but I guess whenever we'll have to do this again at some other point. We could probably think of something else. But either way, I want to thank all of you guys that showed up, especially everyone in the chat too. I guess that'll be it. I'll probably leave this stream up. I won't unlist this one, but thanks for everyone that showed up. Let me now just end the stream right now. Okay.
Absolutely, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah, everyone have a nice night. Okay.